3 people have already been executed in the first 3 weeks of 2023. Let's see what were the crimes they committed, as well as their last words and last meals. Amber McLaughlin, known as Scott McLaughlin, was born on January 13, 1973 and was executed on January 3, 2023 by the state of Missouri. Amber was an American transgender woman who was put to death for and killing her ex-girlfriend Beverly Gunther in 2003. McLaughlin was living as a man at the time of the crime, and while she was incarcerated, she changed her gender to female. She became the country's first openly transgender death row inmate. Scott McLaughlin continued to be McLaughlin's legal name, and both the execution warrant and the jail records listed her by this name. Because of a 1992 conviction of essay against a 14-year-old girl, McLaughlin was listed as a offender. According to court documents, McLaughlin would appear at the 45-year-old Gunther's suburban St. Louis workplace, occasionally hiding inside. Police officers often escorted Gunther to her vehicle after work. At that time, she obtained a restraining order against McLaughlin. The night of November 20, 2003, Gunther's neighbors reported her disappearance to the police. Officers arrived at the office building and discovered a blood trail and the broken knife handle close to her car. A day later, McLaughlin directed police to the spot where the body had been discarded in St. Louis, close to the Mississippi River. The jury was split evenly during McLaughlin's 2006 trial over the death penalty that would result in a life sentence in jail in the majority of American states. However, Missouri is one of just 2 states, the other being Indiana, where a judge has the authority to execute a person if the jury cannot agree on the appropriateness of the death penalty. McLaughlin's difficult background and mental health issues, which the jury was never told about during her trial, were mentioned in the clemency appeal. According to the petition, when she was a toddler, a foster provider put feces on her face and her adoptive father shocked her. It mentioned extreme depression that led to numerous attempts at suicide as a child and an adult. The petition also contained records citing diagnoses of gender dysphoria, a disorder that results in suffering and other symptoms when a person's gender identity and the sex they were assigned at birth diverge. However, according to her lawyer, Larry Comp, McLaughlin's sexual orientation was not the main emphasis of the clemency application. This clemency was denied. A spiritual advisor was on Amber McLaughlin's side as she talked softly while receiving the lethal injection of pentobarbital. McLaughlin took several deep breaths before closing her eyes, and she was declared deceased a short while afterwards. In a final statement that McLaughlin had, she said, "I'm sorry for what I did. I'm a loving and caring person." Her final meal had a cheeseburger, French fries, a strawberry milkshake, and a bag of peanut M&Ms. Robert Allen Fratta was born on February 22, 1957, and he was executed on January 10, 2023 by the state of Texas. Robert Fratta was given the death penalty in 1996 after a Harris County jury found him guilty of organizing a murder-for-hire scheme to eliminate his wife Farrah despite his repeated claims of innocence. The former police officer and firefighter was attending church at the time, but authorities marked him as a suspect partly because it was claimed that before the crime he had reportedly searched for a hitman. Prosecutors claimed that in the end he recruited Joseph Pristash, who then hired a third person to carry out the murder. The death penalty was imposed on all 3 individuals. Before the execution started, Barry Brown, Fratta's spiritual advisor, prayed for him for roughly 3 minutes. As Fratta was shackled to the death chamber gurney, Brown called for prayers for hearts that have been broken, for people who grieved and those who will grieve in the days ahead. Brown had his prayer book on the pillow next to Fratta's head, with his right palm resting on Fratta's right hand. He prayed for God to be merciful to Bobby. When the warden inquired whether he had any closing remarks, Fratta responded, "No." Before all motion ceased, Fratta snored aloud 6 times. 2 days before his execution, he described his sentence as enlightening during an interview with the organization Death Penalty Action. It's been kind of an enlightening experience as far as I never gave any thought to the death penalty even though I was a police officer. Now that I'm going through it, I can understand how so ridiculously tormenting it is for the inmates to be put through this. To have you knowing the day and time and everything that you're going to die, and it's just prolonged, and everything that they put you through beforehand, this is torture. One of his sons, now 37 years old, as well as his former brother-in-law, were present at the execution. He did not look at them, not even for a second. Since he was executed in Texas, there was no special meal granted to Fratta. The state banned any special meal requests in September 2011 after condemned prisoner Lawrence Russell Brewer asked for a substantial and pricey farewell meal but refused to eat any of it, claiming that he was just not hungry. The other day, I found Fratta's pen pal profile. This is what it said. Hi, my name is Bobby and I'm on Texas death row. All my official appeals are over. I am looking for female friends, women companions, please. Any size and shape, but preferably young enough to be internet savvy. The attached photo is of me inside my cell on March 3rd, 2022 for my Overcomers graduation ceremony. I've also graduated from Bridges to Life and the Truth Project, and I am participating in 4 more courses to complete this first ever faith-based program on death row. I've written and published a book, written 6 short video skits thus far, and I'm working on a new venture you may find interesting. I'm easygoing, non-judgmental, open to any topic, and answer all questions honestly. You can read a lot more about me and my case. Just ask me for my social media information when you write me. Now I'm anxiously awaiting to hear from you and learn your interests and even anything you need or would like to vent about. I'm a good listener. To have a friend, I have to be a friend. Give me the opportunity to be your friend. Please be sure to provide your mailing address so I can reply. With love, Bobby. Scott James Eizember was born on January 10, 1961, and he was executed on January 12, 2023 by the state of Oklahoma. He was found guilty of the 2003 slayings of A.J. Cantrell, 76 years old, and Patsy Cantrell, 70 years old. Although Eizember was guilty, his lawyers maintained that his life still had value. In order to more conveniently monitor his ex-girlfriend who lived across the street, Eizember broke into the Cantrell's house. Before entering the house, Eizember waited for the couple to depart, and when they unexpectedly returned home, he killed them. Although defense lawyers said that Patsy was shot while AJ and Eizember fought over the weapon, the prosecutors claim he shot Patsy with a shotgun before using that shotgun to beat AJ to death. Eizember entered Catherine Smith's house shortly after the killings. He shot Smith's son in the back and then he attacked Smith's mother. Both people involved in the encounter survived and Eizember left the area. He wasn't discovered for some months. He was allegedly trying to get to Arkansas by threatening another couple with a gun and ordering them to drive him there. Before phoning the police, the husband was able to locate a gun he had stashed inside his car and shot Eizember 4 times. At 10:01 a.m., Eizember's execution started. The 3 drugs used in Oklahoma's current fatal injection procedure are midazolam for sedation, rocuronium bromide for stopping breathing, and potassium chloride for stopping the heart. In order to make eye contact with those witnesses who were present for him, Eizember raised his head a few times and nodded. 2 of them were lawyers, and one of them looked like a relative. 14 minutes after the execution procedure started, a doctor gave Eizember one more checkup and pronounced him dead at 10:15 a.m. Hood, his spiritual advisor, prayed over Eizember as he lay dying. In his last statement, Eizember said, "I told the truth. I cannot convince everyone that I told the truth, obviously. The court also said I told the truth. So for those people out there who don't seem to want to tell the truth, that's on them. That's on their head. I'm at peace. My conscience is clear completely. I love my children."
I apologize profusely to all the victims. I make no excuses. I belong in prison.
As he began to receive the drugs, he mouthed the words "I love you" towards his daughter who was in the witness room. His last meal was a medium rare ribeye steak and 2 sides of fries. There are 5 executions scheduled for the month of February. Wesley Lynn Ruiz, Leonard Sheldon Taylor, John Lizelle Balentine, Richard Eugene Glossip, and Donald David Dillbeck. It remains to be seen how many of them will be carried out, as clemency and stays can be given at any moment. 4 people have been executed in February 2023. Let's see what were the crimes they committed, as well as their last words and last meals. Wesley Lynn Ruiz, 43 years old, executed on February 1, 2023, after 16 years on death row in the state of Texas. Ruiz was a drug dealer and gang member in the western Dallas metro region. He was 27 years old on Friday, March 22, 2007, when the DPD Murder Division reported that a 1996 Chevy Caprice with 4 doors, tinted windows, and chrome wheels was related to a horrifying crime that had occurred 2 days earlier. Detectives spotted the car on the Stemmons Freeway and asked for help. The car's driver, Ruiz, had an AR-15. As Mark Nix, 33 years old, responded to the report from his colleagues in the murder division, he observed the car driving along Mockingbird Lane to the west of the Dallas metropolitan region. The policeman approached, and just behind him was Wesley Lynn Ruiz's car. Ruiz tried to joke around with the on-Spurs DPD cops. He accelerated the Chevy Caprice unevenly before abruptly coming to a stop. The police were on the verge of ramming the car they were chasing many times at full speed. Every detail was filmed by patrol cameras. During the high-speed pursuit, Wesley Lynn Ruiz struck a curb, quickly lost control of the Chevy Caprice, and the car sped up a sloped field next to the road. The only police car that followed the gang member's vehicle was Officer Mark Nix. The blow and the angle of the slope caused Wesley Lynn Ruiz's car to become trapped. Patrolman Mark Nix fearlessly jumped out of his squad car and chased the Chevy Caprice. His life was suddenly taken by a hail of gunfire. Ruiz was also shot by the DPD officers, and in spite of all the gunshots, they were able to evacuate their badly wounded comrade from the crime scene. Tension rose as Ruiz kept shooting the officers with his AR-15. Paramedics from the Dallas Fire Department arrived promptly. Yet, despite their best efforts, the brave officer died while undergoing treatment in the emergency hospital. Before appearing in court, Wesley Lynn Ruiz sought medical attention for his injuries. He received the death penalty in Dallas County 1 year after murdering Officer Mark Nix. There was no final meal granted in Ruiz's case since he was on death row in Texas, where the last meal is no longer a privilege offered to the inmates. In a final statement, Ruiz said, "I would like to apologize to Mark and the Nix family. I hope this brings you closure. I want to say to all my family and friends around the world, thank you for supporting me. To my kids, stand tall and continue to make me proud. Don't worry about me. I'm going to be okay." Leonard Sheldon Taylor, 58 years old, executed on February 7, 2023, after 18 years on death row in the state of Missouri. On December 3, 2004, Angela Rowe and her 3 children's remains were discovered at Rowe's residence. The officers had to force their way inside the house through a bedroom window since it was locked. The air conditioner was set to 50 degrees and the television was on. Newspapers were in front of the yard and mail was in the mailbox. Rowe had sustained 4 gunshot wounds in total, 2 to her left arm, 1 to her chest, and 1 fatal one to her head, according to an autopsy. Tyrese Conley, age 5, Alexis Conley, age 10, and Akria Conley, age 6, all suffered fatal gunshot wounds to the head. The medical examiner determined that they had been dead for 2 to 3 weeks. In addition to being married to a California resident, Debreen Williams, Taylor was also in a relationship with Rowe at the time of her passing. Taylor called his brother on November 23rd and begged him for money. He also claimed to have killed Angela during a dispute and planned to kill the kids. He claimed that he turned on the air conditioner when asked how he was still in the house with the remains several days later. At the home of a different girlfriend in Madisonville, Kentucky, on December 9th, Taylor was arrested. Police were keeping an eye on the place and they saw him leave the house and he was laying on the floorboard of a car. A bloodstain on one of 3 pairs of Taylor's sunglasses that police found in his suitcase eventually matched Rowe's blood according to a DNA test. His last meal consisted in a seafood platter, cheeseburger, French fries, cheesecake, and vanilla ice cream. Once the 5 grams of pentobarbital were injected, Taylor kicked his feet and took 5 or 6 heavy breaths before ceasing all motion. Taylor's last word was, "Muslims live eternally in the hearts of our family and friends. That is your destiny, it is not your enemy. We anticipate meeting it. Peace." John Lizelle Balentine, 54 years old, executed on February 8, 2023, after 26 years on death row in the state of Texas. Early on January 21, 1998, Balentine, carrying a .32 automatic pistol, climbed through a window to enter a home that he once lived in with Misty Taylor. Once inside, Balentine shot and killed 3 teens while they slept. Stephen Brady Watson, 15 years old, Kai Geyer, 15 years old, and Mark Kaler Jr., 17 years old, Misty's brother. Each victim received a gunshot wound to the head. Balentine confessed to the crimes after he was caught in Houston after escaping to New Mexico. In a recorded statement to police that was played at his 1999 trial, Balentine said that he left the home because there was a lot of drug use in there. He described how the brother of his then girlfriend planned to kill him first, so he sneaked inside the house and shot the teenagers one by one. A nearby resident called 911 after hearing a gunshot. When questioned by an officer who responded to the report while Balentine was 50 years away, strolling down the street, he gave a false identity. After finding an unfired .32 caliber bullet in Balentine's pocket, the police let him go because carrying a bullet wasn't illegal. After learning of the triple homicide later that day, it took the police 6 months to track down Balentine. No special final meal granted since he was on Texas death row. According to the Associated Press, Balentine appeared cheerful when witnesses entered the death chamber. He reportedly asked someone standing close to the gurney to remove the sheet covering his lower 2/3 of his body and give him a foot massage before laughing. Balentine made a brief statement after a short prayer from a spiritual advisor who was holding his left foot. "Yes, ma'am, I want to thank y'all. I love y'all for supporting me. I want to apologize for the wrong I did to y'all. Forgive me. I'm ready, ma'am." He turned to face 7 family members of his 3 victims, including the mothers of all 3, and apologized, saying, "I hope you can find in your heart to forgive me." Balentine snored loudly twice. He yawned and then drew 2 breaths as the lethal dose of pentobarbital started running through IV needles in his arms. The snores grew quieter before ceasing. By 6:36 p.m., 15 minutes after the medications had been injected, he was declared dead. Before leaving the execution room, witnesses exchanged high fives. These included Kaler's sister, who was once Balentine's girlfriend. Donald Dillbeck, 59 years old, executed on February 23rd after 32 years on death row in the state of Florida. Dillbeck was sentenced to death after being found guilty of killing Faye Lamb Van in a parking lot of a Tallahassee mall in 1990. In Gadsden County, where he was serving a life sentence for the 1979 murder of Lee County Deputy Dwight Lynn Hall, 31 years old, when he was only 15 years old, Dillbeck had fled from a work-release catering job. According to court records, he traveled to Tallahassee and attempted to carjack a vehicle. When Van, who was in the car waiting for her family, resisted being attacked, she was tragically stabbed. Dillbeck was the first prisoner executed in Florida since 2019 and the 100th inmate since 1975. 32 years after being given the death penalty by a judge, Donald Dillbeck awoke early on the last day of his life. According to Department of Prison spokeswoman Michelle Glady, he carried out his regular activities. She claimed that he had a meeting with his spiritual guide. His final meal was fried shrimp, mushrooms, onion rings, butter pecan ice cream, pecan pie, and a chocolate bar, which he consumed around 9:45 a.m. Dillbeck delivered his final remarks prior to being executed on Thursday, attacking Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and his policies. "I know I hurt people when I was young. I really messed up. But I know Ron DeSantis has done a lot worse. He's taken a lot from a lot of people. I speak for all men, women, and children. He's put his foot on our necks." Then he insulted DeSantis and others like him. Last month, on the same day he proposed amending Florida law to require a supermajority, Rather than an unanimous verdict from a jury, DeSantis signed Dillbeck's death warrant. There were 2 other people scheduled to be executed in February. Stanley Fitzpatrick's execution was reprieved. The new date of execution has been moved to April 16, 2026. Richard Glossip's execution was rescheduled for May 18, 2023. In March, there were 6 people initially scheduled to be executed, but again, one was reprieved and another one was rescheduled. At this time, Gary Greene, Arthur Brown, Charles Lorraine, and Annibal Canales Jr. are waiting for the capital punishment to be carried out next month. There were 7 people scheduled for execution in the month of March. 2 warrants were reprieved, 1 was rescheduled, 1 was stayed, and another one was withdrawn. 2 people ended up on the execution gurney. Gary Greene, executed on March 7, 2023, after 13 years on death row in the state of Texas. Greene was found guilty in 2010 of killing his wife Lovita Armstead and her daughter Jasmine Montgomery, who was 6 years old. Lovita Armstead was 32 years old and she had 3 children, Jerome, Jarrett, and Jasmine. She was a teacher and a young single mother when she met Gary Greene, with whom she is said to have lived for a year or 2 prior to getting married in 2009. At 9:30 p.m., the police was called to Lovita's residence for concerns regarding a possible homicide. They found her lying face down on the floor of the master bedroom. She had been stabbed 30 times. Moreover, asphyxial signs and minor bruises on the side of her neck were discovered during an autopsy. Jasmine was found in the bathroom, her wrists and legs bound with duct tape. She was positioned next to the bathtub. A phone cord was also found wrapped around her ankles. Jasmine's autopsy revealed that she had drowned and this was the cause of death. She was also bleeding from the top of her skull. The ones that alerted the neighbors about what happened were Lovita's 2 sons, Jarrett and Jerome. Only hours after the double homicide, Gary Greene, 38 years old at the time, agreed to turn himself in to the police after being convinced to do so by his mother. He confessed right away to killing Lovita and Jasmine. After only a few months of marriage, Lovita decided to file for divorce from Gary. Gary had left the house and she hoped to have their marriage annulled. On the day of the tragedy, he convinced Lovita to let him stay at the home. Gary acknowledged to the police that he had become upset due to the breakup. Gary confessed to the authorities, "My original intention was to kill all of us, since he thought they could all spend forever as a family." The 2 boys, who were then 9 and 12 years old, were picked up from the church after he took a shower. Gary even threatened to kill them both and stabbed Jarrett in the abdomen. The boys were able to convince him to let them live, though. Following that, Gary led them into the master bedroom where he showed them the bodies. He told them to call the police when he was gone. The boys quickly made their way to their neighbor's house after calling 911. Later, Gary tried to end his life by ingesting some narcotics, but he was caught. On the day of the killings, Armstead had written 2 letters to Greene, telling him that although she loved him, she had to do what was best for her. In his own letter, which was angry and rambling, Greene expressed the belief that Armstead and her children were involved in a plot against him. "You asked to see the monster, so here it is, the monster you made me. There will be 5 lives taken today, me being the 5th, Greene wrote. Late in February 2023, Greene's attorneys sent a letter to Dallas County District Attorney John Cruzot pleading with him to support their request to postpone Greene's execution so that additional assessment of his intellectual disability could be conducted. The motion was dismissed. While doctors testified at his trial that Greene likely had schizoaffective disorders, his lawyers contend his defense counsel did not fully look into how this condition impacted his life or what part it had in the murders. Jurors in Texas are permitted to take into account mitigating circumstances, such as mental illness, while determining whether to condemn someone to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld Greene's conviction and death sentence after he filed an appeal. Greene was scheduled for execution on March 7th. Standing next to the gurney in the death chamber at the inmate's feet, Greene's selected Buddhist spiritual advisor delivered a quick prayer. When the warden inquired as to if Greene had any closing remarks, Greene quickly apologized. His final statement was, "I apologize for all the harm I have caused you and your family," Greene said, looking at relatives of his victims who watched through a window. "We ate together, we laughed and cried together as a family. I'm sorry I failed you. I took not one, but two people that we all loved, and I had to live with that while I was here. We were all one, and I broke that bond. I ask that you forgive me, not for me, but for y'all. I'm fixing to go home, and y'all are going to be here. I want to make sure you don't suffer. You have to forgive me to heal and move on." Prison staff had to utilize a vein in Greene's right arm and a vein on top of his left hand in order to place the IV needles, which caused a little delay in the injection. Greene was praising the Polanski unit staff, chaplains, and all the wonderful human beings at the Polanski unit, the jail that houses Texas condemned inmates, as the lethal dose of sedative pentobarbital started. He then exhaled numerous times quickly, which turned into snores. All motion ended after 9 snores. Many of the victim's family members hugged and sobbed. He was declared dead at 7:07 p.m. Montgomery, Jasmine's father, said he still has a close relationship with Lovita's 2 sons. He said both lead productive lives, and Jerome Armstead has a daughter who looks just like Jasmine. Arthur Brown, executed on March 9, 2023, after 31 years on death row in the state of Texas. On June 20, 1992, 4 people were shot and they died during a drug sale at a home in Houston, Texas. Marion Dudley, Arthur Brown Jr., and Tony Dunson went to Jose and Rachel Tovar's home to purchase 3 kilograms of cocaine when they made the decision to steal their drugs and cash. 6 people were bound and shot after the trio entered the home. When the police arrived, Jose Tovar, Jessica Quinones, who was 7 months pregnant, and Frank Farias had already passed away. One of the 3 survivors, Audrey Brown, eventually passed away in a hospital, bringing the number to a total of 4 murder victims. The remaining 2 survivors identified their attackers as Tony Dunson, Marion Dudley, and Arthur Brown Jr. After the killings, the murderers escaped the site. When they learned that the police were looking for them as potential murder suspects, they fled the town. They bought a Jeep Cherokee and convinced 2 women to drive them from Louisville, Kentucky to Louisville, Alabama. Once there, they used fake names to purchase tickets to Ohio. They departed from Columbus for the north. Despite the authorities finding a sports automobile they believed belonged to Dudley, no new information was revealed. The families of Dudley, Brown, and Dunson pleaded with them to come forward, but they thought the young men were innocent. On July 8, 1992, Dudley and Dunson were found inside a trailer near Fayetteville, North Carolina. Then, on October 23, 1992, Brown was taken into custody by members of the Tuscaloosa County Metro Homicide Unit in a Northport, Alabama apartment. Arthur Brown was found guilty of murder. He received the death sentence in November of 1993. Of the 3 criminals, he was the first to be found guilty. The second of the 3 criminals to be sentenced was Marion Butler Dudley, who received the capital murder conviction as well. On January 23, 1995, he received the death penalty verdict. After being found guilty of capital murder, Antoine Lamone Dunson received a life sentence. He will become eligible for parole on July 8, 2027. Both Rachel Tovar and Cortez named Brown as the person who attacked them in court, but according to documents, Tovar offered police in the hospital contradictory information, and Cortez has previously been unable to identify Brown from a lineup of pictures. Cortez again failed to recognize Brown from images in Dunson's subsequent trial. Guns thought to be connected to Brown and thought to have fired the deadly rounds were seized elsewhere, including on another guy after he died in a related attempt robbery at an Alabama drug dealer's home. The defense hypothesis at trial focused on Terrell Hill, identifying him as the most likely gunman. The science that was utilized to link the weapons to the projectiles discovered there was eventually debunked on appeals, but the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed Brown's punishment nonetheless. Without the ballistic evidence, the judge determined the jury would have most likely still found Brown guilty. The son of Rachel Tovar said his mother used the nickname for Hill when describing her attackers to police in the hospital during an interview that was withheld from the trial and kept a secret from Brown's lawyers until last year. She informed police in one interview she heard the nicknames Red and Squirt being used in the attack, and that her son would know them from opening the door. Brown insisted on his innocence up until the very end, claiming that the authorities had prevented him from using the evidence that would have shown he wasn't the murderer that night. Brown was scheduled for execution on March 9th. In his last statement on the gurney, he said, "What is occurring here tonight is not justice. It's murder of an innocent man for a murder that occurred in 1992. My co-defendant was executed in 2006, and if I'm innocent, he was innocent, and they killed an innocent man, and the state doesn't want the truth to come out. Tonight, Texas will kill a second innocent man for a murder that occurred in 1992. I have no further words." After receiving a fatal dose of pentobarbital, he reportedly took 2 long breaths before starting to snore. 7 minutes after receiving the medicine, at 6:37 p.m., Brown was pronounced dead. Both Gary Greene and Arthur Brown were executed by the state of Texas, which means they were not granted a special final meal request. There are 3 people waiting for their execution in the month of April: Aaron Ganches, Louis Gaskin, and Ivan Cantu. Then in May, we will see if Richard Glossip's capital punishment is carried out. There were 7 people scheduled to be executed in April. Ramael Salholt execution was stayed, 2 warrants were withdrawn in the cases of Andre Thomas and Ivan Cantu, 1 warrant expired in the case of Aaron Ganches, David Sneed was resentenced to life in prison, the execution of Anthony Sanchez was rescheduled, and Louis Gaskin was executed on April 12th. Louis Bernard Gaskin was born on March 11, 1967. When he was just 22 years old, on the evening of December 20, 1989, Gaskin approached the Palm Coast house of 56-year-old Robert and 55-year-old Georgette Sternfels while armed with a .22 caliber rifle and dressed entirely in black to escape detection. Gaskin went around the house to the back window where Georgette was seated on the sofa and Robert was seated in a recliner. Gaskin pulled the trigger, killing Robert after 5 shots and wounding Georgette once. After the initial shot, Georgette was still alive, so Gaskin reloaded his weapon and shot her once in the head, killing her. A short while later, Gaskin arrived at Joseph and Mary Rector's house in a car. Gaskin shot his rifle into the house while the Rectors were watching television, hitting Joseph. Joseph was able to escape the space. When Gaskin broke the back window, Mary and Joseph took cover in a closet. As they fled to the car, Gaskin opened fire on them from the inside of the house. The Rectors were able to escape to a nearby hospital by getting in their car after all of the shots missed. After the residence was searched by the police, it became obvious that the offender had robbed it. When the murders were made public, Gaskin was almost instantly implicated because his girlfriend's cousin stated that Gaskin had been home shortly after the killings and claimed to be wrapping some presents. On December 30th, Gaskin was taken into custody. He first denied being involved in the killings. He subsequently admitted to the murders though and claimed they were totally random. In a recorded statement, he admitted to having murderous impulses. He directed law enforcement officers to a canal where he had stashed the wallet, credit cards, and other goods. Gaskin's response to the question of why he did it was, "God said no, the devil said yes. The grip of the devil over me was stronger than that of God." In addition, he admitted to the 1986 murder of a co-worker. The presents were found to come from the Sternfels property during a search of Gaskin's house. In July 1990, following a 2-month trial, Gaskin was judged responsible for 2 first-degree murders and 2 attempted murders. He was consequently handed 2 death sentences. From the time of his arrest until his death, which occurred 34 years later, he was detained at the Florida State Prison in Rayford. The execution date for Gaskin was set for April 12, 2023 by Governor Ron DeSantis on March 13th, and since Gaskin was on death row in the state of Florida, he did get to choose the last meal, and we'll see what he asked for in a second.
Louis Gaskin is scheduled to die by lethal injection Wednesday. He was convicted of murdering a Flagler County couple in 1989. Gaskin was dubbed the Ninja Killer after he broke into the home of Robert and Georgette Sturmfels while wearing all-black ninja clothing. He shot the couple with a rifle and stole several items, including a clock and video cassette recorder that he planned to give to his girlfriend as Christmas gifts. In the new appeal, Gaskin's attorney writes, because the trial judge and the recommending jury were denied the mitigation that was extant in Mr. Gaskin's case, the recommending jury and the trial court never focused on the unique circumstances of Mr. Gaskin. His deprivation, mental illness, and trauma he suffered was never heard, thus failing to meet the minimum constitutional requirements. This would be the second execution in Florida this year after a long pause dating back to 2019.
Before moving forward, please hit that subscribe button. YouTube analytics showed that only 16.2% of you are subscribed and 83.8% are not. Thank you. According to Department of Corrections spokeswoman Kayla McLaughlin-Smith at a press briefing, Gaskin ate his last meal on Wednesday at 9:45 a.m. after waking up at 4:45 a.m. The meal included barbecue pork ribs, pork and turkey neck, buffalo wings, shrimp fried rice, French fries, and water. Despite having his sister visit him on Wednesday, Gaskin did not see a spiritual advisor, according to Ms. McLaughlin-Smith. The execution, which was scheduled to begin at 6 p.m., was carried out without any issues and was not attended by any family members of the victims. When asked if he had a final statement, Gaskin said, "Justice is not about the crime. It's not about the criminal. It's about the law." He then referred to the legal proceedings surrounding his case and the appeals and finished his statement saying, "Look at my case." At 6:02 p.m., Gaskin was administered the lethal combination of medicines which made him breathe heavily and caused his chest to rise and fall while covered in a white sheet. At 6:05 p.m., the prison warden went to see if Gaskin was still conscious. He remained silent. At 6:07 p.m., Gaskin's breathing seemed to stop. At 6:14 p.m., a doctor checked on Gaskin in the execution chamber before announcing his death a minute later.
I'm independent news services, but I'm going into two radio stations, one in Live Oak and one in Flagler Beach.
And you witnessed this. You've witnessed many of these before.
Yes,
Can
I
you
have.
tell us how this one played out?
This one played out pretty good. I mean, it was, what's routine mean? He quietly went to sleep and he died.
Can you tell us some of the last words he said?
Basically, he referred to his case that didn't go wrong. He said that basically it's not about the crime or the criminal, it's about the law. And then he asked, the last 4 words of his life was, look at my case. In between, it was garbled and the 3 of us couldn't get it down.
Did he appear calm?
Oh, yes. Yeah, he just laid there all through the process. It didn't even look up at the witness list. And usually they'll lift their head and look around, but he didn't even do that.
I know you've covered many of these. Was there anything about this particular execution that stood out, or did this one just seem as textbook as many of the other ones that you've covered?
Well, there were some odd movements involved when they rendered the condemned unconscious. There were some movements that I've not observed before, but nothing out of the ordinary, showing any pain or any difficulty that I could professionally say.
How fast would you say it? I know you had notes in terms of from the time it started at about 6:03 when they administered, I guess, the first injection, till about around 6:15ish or so when they announced that he was.
A very short period of time. He was rendered unconscious, and by 6:08, 6:09, you could see that the drugs were taking effect, and he quickly died.
Did he try to say anything before they administered
No,
the
he
drug?
was really quiet, laid back, didn't look around, it's just he just laid there.
Is that unusual based on the other?
Well, most of the ones that I have observed in lethal executions, using the lethal means, they look up and see who's around and take some interest in there. Not all of them do, but most of them do. But he did nothing. He just laid there.
Who was inside the room?
You have the team warden, which is manning the phone. You had an FDLE officer to my right, and then you had another officer to the left that was observing. So you had 3 in the room.
Was there anything holding him down?
Oh, yes. He was tightly secured. There was a sheet over him, so you don't see how he's tightly, but you look at the arms, and they're wrapped and he's strapped.
Did you find it unusual that, I mean, because I know usually in these cases, usually the victim's relatives, they will appear, I mean, they will witness the execution. But in this case, none of the victim's relatives were there. Was that a bit unusual?
No, but then again, this happened in Panama City, which is over 300 miles. You're talking about 30 years. So some of the people that were originally in the case may not be around now. So you're talking at the second layer of the victims' families.
I think you meant to say Flagler County.
Flagler County, yeah, I'm sorry. The Panama City is the next one. But still, it takes a lot of effort to wait 30 years or 25 years to see a man die that killed a relative of yours, whether it's a father, a son, a daughter, or a member. So, no, it's not unusual to see something like that to come out, and it's just the DOC to give the last press conference.
And I have to ask, how many years of this, of witnessing executions, have you done this? I mean, how many years?
My first case was Ted Bundy.
Since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, Gaskin's death was the state's 101st execution. On Florida's death row, which is situated at Florida State Prison, some 40 miles southwest of Jacksonville, there are an additional 297 inmates. For the month of May, there are currently 2 scheduled executions, Richard Glossip and newly added Daryl Barwick. There was only 1 person executed in the U.S. in the month of May. Daryl Barwick was found guilty of murdering Rebecca Went and given the death penalty in 1986. Anne Went left her Panama City apartment early on March 31, 1986, to head to Fort Walton Beach. Anne's sister and roommate Rebecca Went stayed at the apartment building and lounged outside until around 11:45 a.m. Around 12:30 p.m., a different apartment complex resident, who was also outside tanning, noticed a man wandering around the property. The witness claimed she observed the man approach the Went's flat and then leave their building and enter the woods. She later identified him as Daryl Barwick. Rebecca's body was discovered in the bathroom of the flat on the evening of March 31st when her sister came home. It was covered in a blanket. Bloody footprints and fingerprints were seen throughout the flat by the investigators who were called to the location, as well as the victim's wallet and purse. Rebecca had been stabbed multiple times and her swimming suit was displaced. She suffered 37 stab wounds to her upper body, as well as several defensive wounds to her hands, according to an autopsy. The medical examiner came to the conclusion that the neck, chest, and abdominal wounds were most probably fatal ones, and that death would have happened 3 to 10 minutes after the initial stabbing.
The Bay County Sheriff's Office and the Springfield Police Department are looking into Monday evening's stabbing death of 24-year-old Rebecca Went. Went was visiting her sister and was staying in her sister's apartment on Russ Lake Drive. Sheriff Lavelle Pitts speculates that Went was sunbathing during the afternoon hours, and it's possible the murder wasn't discovered for some time.
It appeared that some intruder come into the house. Possibly the girl was laying out in the yard, sunning, and someone could have come in when she started back in the house, and it was evident that a tremendous struggle took place. There was evidence of that she fought, all over the house, and that's about all we can tell you at this time. We don't know how long that she was dead, before members of her family come in and found her.
Crime scene investigators were on the scene this morning to continue the search for evidence. Sheriff Pitts is also asking the public's help in this case.
The victim's blanket had a genetic material stain on it, which a crime lab analyst discovered, despite the examiner finding that there was no assay on the victim. After the genetic material was examined and compared with Barwick's blood, it was concluded that Barwick fit within 2% of the population that may have generated the stain. Barwick first told detectives he had nothing to do with Rebecca's murder. However, he admitted to committing the act after being apprehended on April 15th. He claimed that following his observation of Rebecca sunbathing, he drove back to his residence, parked the car, got a knife, and then made his way back to the apartment building where he had first seen Rebecca. He followed her into her apartment after passing her 3 times. Rebecca fought, and Barwick said he was merely trying to steal something. However, when she struggled, he lost control and stabbed her. As the two wrestled and went to the ground, Rebecca was still being stabbed, according to Barwick. Daryl Barwick was born on September 29, 1966, and he was just 19 years and a half when he committed this crime. He had previously been imprisoned for essay and burglary, and he had been out of prison for barely 3 months when he murdered Rebecca Wendt.
Tuesday afternoon, Daryl Brian Barwick was arrested for the stabbing death of Rebecca Wendt. This morning, he was officially charged with first-degree murder and armed burglary. Circuit Judge Don T. Sermons read the charges.
The affidavit states the defendant entered the residence of Rebecca Wendt and while armed with a knife did assault the victim by stabbing her 38 times.
Also present for first appearance was Assistant State Attorney Harry Harper. Sheriff Lavelle Pitts has praised the cooperation that his department received from investigators from the State Attorney's Office. Frank McKeithen, the chief case officer for the Barwick arrest, was in court on behalf of the Sheriff's Department. Judge Sermons appointed public defender Mike Stone to represent Barwick. Barwick was ordered held without bail and will return to offer a plea in the case on June 18th.
102 people have been put to death in Florida since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant for Barwick last month. His execution was the 3rd one planned for Florida this year, following a pause that began in 2019. Barwick's lawyers argue that the execution should be put on hold due to his ongoing mental illness and intellectual incapacity in their last appeal to the Florida Supreme Court. The appeal was denied.
Death row inmate Daryl Barwick is down to his last appeal in his attempt to avoid execution tomorrow night. Friday, his attorneys appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court asking for the stay of execution. They cited what they called the state's failure to give Barwick a fair chance at clemency. That argument has already been rejected by several other state and federal courts. The appeal came on the same day that the Florida Supreme Court rejected Barwick's motion for a stay of execution. Not only did justices affirm the circuit court's conviction and death sentence, but they also said they would not consider any more of Barwick's appeals. Barwick killed 24-year-old Rebecca Wendt at a Russ Lake apartment unit back in September of '86. He was 19 years old at the time. The jury at his 1987 trial recommended the death penalty, as did the jury at his '92 retrial. Governor Ron DeSantis signed Barwick's death warrant on April the 3rd. Barring a last-minute stay, Barwick will die by lethal ejection at 6 o'clock Eastern Time tomorrow night. He'll be the first Bay County death row inmate to be put to death since capital punishment was reinstated in Florida all the way back in 1976.
According to Florida Department of Corrections officials, Daryl Barwick woke up at 4:15 in the morning and he was in good spirits. His last meal was at 9:15 a.m. and he chose to eat fried chicken, mac and cheese, black-eyed peas, rice, and cornbread, which he paired with a cola. For dessert, he chose strawberry ice cream. Before his scheduled execution at 6 o'clock in the evening, jail officials reported that although Barwick had not interacted with his family members in person, he had recently spoken to them on the phone. According to officials, no family members of the victim were scheduled to attend the execution. Before being given a lethal injection, Daryl Barwick made a brief statement. He was already tied to a table and covered with a sheet in the execution chamber when the screen was raised. The intravenous lines were already in place on his left arm, and only the face and the arm were visible. His last words were, "It's time to apologize to the victim's family and to my family. I can't explain why I did what I did. And another thing I would like to say, the state of Florida needs to show some kind of compassion and kindness for each other with so many kids in prison. There are 14 and 15-year-olds serving life sentences." In addition to the 4 press representatives and employees of the Florida Department of Corrections, there were 17 official witnesses present. After he was done speaking, a staff member declared that the preparatory stage of the execution was over and that the execution phase was about to start. At 6:02 p.m., the lethal mix of 3 drugs, a sedative, a paralytic, and the medication to stop his heart, began to be administered. Throughout the process, he kept his eyes open. Barwick's left arm began to twitch shortly after he started breathing heavily for several minutes, with his chest visibly rising and falling. Barwick was approached by employees at 6:06 but remained silent despite keeping his eyes open. A member of the execution team's medical staff declared Barwick dead at 6:14 p.m. after only 12 minutes.
The sentence of the state of Florida versus Daryl Brian Barwick was carried out at 6:14 p.m. The execution took place without incident.
Up until Wednesday, the state of Florida had executed 101 death row inmates. Wednesday evening, 56-year-old Daryl Barwick became number 102, executed by lethal injection. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected his last hope for a stay of execution earlier in the day. Prison officials say Barwick was calm and in good spirits around 9:15 Wednesday morning when he received his last meal. Afterward, he consulted with a spiritual leader, then waited. Around 5 o'clock, the execution process began, with Barwick being prepared, strapped to a table, and transported to the execution chamber. At 6 o'clock, nearly 3 dozen official witnesses, media, and Department of Corrections officials gathered in a viewing room to watch the state carry out the sentence. At 6:02, the execution team began the lethal injection process. 5 minutes later, Barwick slipped into unconsciousness. At 6:14, a medical professional pronounced him dead. Rebecca Went's family did not attend the execution. None of the witnesses had a personal connection to the case. From the time they entered the room until the time they left, no one said a word, no one looked away, and no one displayed any emotions.
This is a case where there has never been a doubt about the defendant's guilt. Not one, but 2 juries found the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt and recommended that he be sentenced to death. Unfortunately, it took 37 years from the time of the crime for that punishment to be carried out in this case. We appreciate the tireless efforts of the Attorney General's office and Governor DeSantis' office to obtain justice for the victim and her family.
The governor of Florida dropped the requirement for recommending the death penalty in the state this month, allowing jurors to do so without unanimous consent. Only 8 out of the 12 jurors must propose the death penalty under new laws approved by the legislature. Additionally, DeSantis signed a bill this week that makes essay of a kid under the age of 12 a crime punishable by the death sentence. Both bills received public support from the governor. Another person that was scheduled to be executed in May was Richard Glossip, and I was constantly checking for updates regarding his case. Just last week, the Supreme Court decided to block his execution. The state's Attorney General, Mr. Drummond, made a remarkable decision in his letter, saying that the state had come to the difficult but essential conclusion that Glossip's capital conviction is unsustainable and a new trial is imperative. The stay issued by the Supreme Court will remain in place while the justices decide whether to hear Glossip's appeal, and if they do, until they decide its outcome. The case of Richard Glossip has been controversial to say the least. Barry Van Trees was killed by Justin Sneed on January 7, 1997, with a baseball bat. The murder took place at the Best Budget Inn in Oklahoma City, where Glossip was the manager, Sneed was the maintenance worker, and Van Trees was the hotel's owner. Sneed confessed and admitted to the police that Glossip had given him the order to kill the victim in exchange for being spared the death penalty. Glossip resisted taking a plea deal because he claimed he was truly innocent. A jury in Oklahoma found Glossip guilty of the murder in July 1998, and they also gave him the death penalty. The conviction was overturned in 2001 by the unanimous Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, which described the prosecution's evidence as very poor and said Glossip had had unconstitutionally inadequate legal representation. A second Oklahoma jury found Glossip guilty of the murder in August 2004 and gave him the death penalty again. Glossip claimed that his defense attorney had resigned because of intimidation by the prosecution. However, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the death penalty in April 2007, with 2 judges voting in favor, 1 judge specifically concurring, and 2 judges against. Sister Helen Prejean advocated for Glossip, but she was unsuccessful in persuading the Clemency Board to take into account letters from Sneed's relatives who think Sneed was lying. Glossip was almost entirely convicted based on Sneed's testimony, which he used to avoid the death penalty himself. I'm curious to know, what do you guys think about Richard Glossip's case? Was he really wrongfully convicted, or did he actually plan the murder of his former boss? There are no other death warrants signed for the month of May, but for the month of June there are 2 people waiting to be executed. These people are Alabama death row inmate James Barber and Missouri prisoner Michael Tisius. There were 2 people executed in the month of June. Michael Tisius, Missouri, 23 years on death row. Michael Tisius and Roy Vance shared a cell at the Randolph County Jail in Huntsville, Missouri at the beginning of June 2000. Tisius received a 30-day sentence, and Vance informed him that he would likely spend the next 50 years behind bars. Tisius and Vance explored several plans where Tisius would go back to prison to help Vance in escaping as a result. One of those schemes called for Tisius to bring a gun to the jail, subdue the guards, and hand it to Vance, who would take over and free all of the prisoners. The Randolph County Jail was a 2-story brick structure that had previously been a residence. When a guest rang the doorbell, the officers could remotely unlock the jail's front door, which was always locked. The dispatch room where the officers were stationed was to the right of a counter in the small foyer at the front door. The jail cells were located in the back of the building along a hallway from the dispatch center. Release day for Tisius was June 13, 2000. He made contact with Tracy Balentine, Vance's girlfriend, soon after he was freed, and she informed him that she was game for carrying out the escape scheme. In order to pick up Tisius and return him to Macon, Balentine traveled from Macon to Columbia 4 days later with Heather Douglas. Tisius and Balentine stayed at Douglas's house for 4 or 5 days. Douglas overheard the 2 discussing various escape plans for Vance while they were being transported to Columbia, including the thought of confining the jailers to a cell. They stated that they were joking to Douglas. Douglas testified that she overheard Tisius and Balentine claim to be on a mission in the days that followed, but they did not go into further details. Additionally, Tisius and Balentine mentioned giving cigarettes to Vance while he was in jail and obtaining information from a stupid deputy. Other times, when Douglas entered the room, they would all suddenly stop speaking. In addition, Douglas testified that she observed a gun in Balentine's car and that Tisius and Balentine kept a stereo, clothes, and camping equipment there. Tisius and Balentine made many trips to the jail starting on June 17, 2000, and they did so over a period of several days. On one of those mornings, they were allowed in through the front door and handed a pack of cigarettes to an on-duty police officer, asking for them to be given to Vance. A couple of days later, Tisius and Balentine visited the jail claiming to bring Vance some socks and inquired about his scheduled court appearance. According to Balentine's testimony, each delivery conveyed to Vance specific information, such as the news that Tisius had arrived in town or the fact that the jailbreak would not take place the same night as the delivery. Tisius kept a .22 caliber pistol Balentine had taken from her parents' house in the front of his jeans during several of those visits. Tisius had made an attempt to obtain a larger firearm than the one Balentine had taken. One officer testified that Tisius and Balentine were acting really funny, uneasy, and erratically on the night of one of their visits, prompting him to write a police report about it. On June 21, 2000, when the 2 were traveling on rural roads, Tisius fired the gun through Balentine's car window as a test. Later that evening, as they planned to free Vance from prison, the 2 drove about while listening to a song with the refrain, "Mo Murder." Tisius played the song repeatedly while winding the cassette. It was about time, Tisius said to Balentine, and he would go in and just start shooting, and that he had to do what he had to do. He added that he would enter the jail in a blaze of glory. Tisius and Balentine returned to the Randolph County Jail around 12:15 a.m. on June 22nd and rang the doorbell to be let in. Once more, Tisius hid the gun in his jeans. The 2 claimed to be delivering cigarettes to Vance when speaking with the police. Jason Acton and Leon Egley were the 2 officers in attendance. For almost 10 minutes, Tisius chatted casually with one of the cops, telling him about his plans for the future and how he was doing. According to Balentine's testimony, she was about to inform Tisius she was prepared to leave at that time, but she stopped when she saw him standing with a revolver drawn next to his leg. Acton was instantly killed when Tisius raised his arm while holding a pistol at his side and fired from 2 to 4 feet away, striking him above the left eye. About 10 seconds after killing Acton, Egley started to approach Tisius. Tisius fired 1 or more shots at Egley, causing the officer to fall to the ground. Both cops had no weapons. Tisius then proceeded to Vance's cell after obtaining several keys from the dispatch room. He went back to the dispatch area to look for more keys after being unable to access the cell. Egley seized Balentine legs as he was laying on the ground, and Tisius fired 5 more shots at him from a distance of 2 or 3 feet away while he was in the dispatch area. Egley was shot 5 times, 3 times in the forehead, once in the right cheek, and once in the upper right shoulder. Egley was discovered by authorities in a pool of blood, gasping for air and making gurgling noises. He passed away shortly after. Balentine and Tisius took off in her car. On his way out of town, Tisius flung the keys from the dispatch area out of the window of the car. Balentine fired the weapon while driving across a bridge on Highway 36. Her vehicle broke down after the two traveled from St. Joseph and across the border into Kansas. The keys and revolver were found after the two were detained by the police later that day. Tisius provided verbal and written admissions to the killings after signing a waiver of his Miranda rights. Tisius' theory during the trial was that he was primarily responsible for second-degree murders, despite his admission that he killed the 2 officers by shooting them. He claimed he did so accidentally. On June 6th, at the state jail in Bonne Terre, 42-year-old Michael Tisius received a lethal injection of pentobarbital and was pronounced dead at 10 minutes past 6. As the medication was given, Tisius took a few deep breaths before going silent. Melissa Potts Bowers, his spiritual guide, was present in the room with him. What they were saying to each other is unknown due to the soundproof glass that surrounds the execution chamber. Tisius made the last written statement in which he apologized for his actions and said he made a sincere effort to become a better man. His last statement read, "I am holding tightly to my faith. It's all I have to take with me. I am sorry it had to come to this in this way. I wish I could have made things right while I was still here. I really did try to become a better man. I really tried hard to give as much as I could to as many as I could. I tried to forgive others as I wish to be forgiven, and I pray that God will forgive those who condemned me, just as he forgave those who condemned him. I am sorry, and not because I am at the end, but because I truly am sorry, and I need to say that I love you, Truffle. Seacrest out." His last meal before the execution reportedly consisted of 2 bacon cheeseburgers, curly fries, regular fries, and a chocolate milkshake. Dwayne Owen, Florida, 38 years on death row. A jury found Owen guilty of stabbing and killing 14-year-old Delray Beach babysitter Karen Slattery in 1984, who was watching over 2 toddlers at the time. Just 1 year later, a judge sentenced Owen to death once more for sneaking into Georgiana Warden Bocaraton's house and killing her with a hammer. Additionally, Mrs. Warden was essayed. On the morning of May 29, 1984, as they were getting ready for school, her kids discovered the body. On May 30th, 1984, Owen was taken into custody on separate charges. He confessed to this murder during the course of the subsequent week's worth of questioning. In the victim's residence, a library book bearing Owen's prints was also discovered. Owen allegedly attacked 2 additional ladies in Palm Beach County who had survived. In addition to his death sentence, he was given 6 life terms for these crimes. Just before and after Owen turned 23 years old, all 4 attacks took place. Owen's attorneys contended that he should not be executed on the grounds of insanity because he suffers from schizophrenia. Last week, though, the Texas Supreme Court dismissed Owen's most recent appeal, and on Wednesday, the U.S. Supreme Court also dismissed it, stating that even though Owen has mental health concerns, they do not prevent him from being put to death because he is aware of the penalty for his actions. According to state-employed psychiatrists, he displayed no signs of the condition during the conversation. In addition, the defense claimed that Owen suffers from gender dysphoria and dementia, both of which the court's investigators could find no evidence of. According to court documents, Owen's mother passed away when he was just 11 years old, and as a child, he was severely physically abused and essayed. After 38 years on death row, Owen was executed the evening of June 15, 2023 by lethal injection. He woke up at 7 a.m. and had his last meal at 9:45 a.m. It was a bacon cheeseburger without a bun, onion rings, strawberries, a vanilla milkshake, and coffee. Corrections officials allowed the meals to cost up to $40. Some family members of the victims witnessed the execution, but the Department of Corrections officials would not disclose who they were. Owen received no visits from friends or family. When asked in the death chamber minutes before he died whether he had any last words, he said no. He did leave a last statement which read, "I have transcended space and time. I have seen the visions of the crowd. My energy and particles will transform ad infinitum. I will live on. I am Tula, 13. The three-drug mixture used for lethal injections in Florida consists of a sedative, a paralytic, and a heart-stopping drug. The first is etomidate, an anesthetic drug. The second, pancuronium bromide, which paralyzes the lungs. The third drug is potassium chloride, which stops the heart. A saline solution ensures the drugs are pushed through the system. That is it for today, guys. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.